Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk with Tia and Jill. And we have a very special guest today. Welcome, Beth Fernandes.
Yay.
Thank you for
Hello.
having me.
Well,
Yes.
thank you for starting your week with us and with our audience.
Yes,
Great way to start the week. I'm loving it.
it is. It is a great way to start the week. We think so. We're biased.
Right. Sometimes just I used to think I like to just dive in and get the week started. And I do. And I do that even before Real Talk starts. But I do like this moment of like just pausing and having a conversation because otherwise I do just hit the ground running and go, go, go. And so I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that our audience joins us. Like it's a good start to the week.
Yes, yes. So say hello in the comments because we want to see you out there, see where you are listening from or watching from. We love to say hello. And you're right. I love to just hear like what are people focused on for the week? Like what are some top things? And Real Talk allows me to do that at the start of my week because I know today's going to be great.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I'm typically over in Minnesota when we start our Real Talk, but today I'm out in California. So it's a little bit dreary, like just rainy here, but like most places, they probably need the rain. So
that is true. They were saying like most of the US is they're like in a drought. And I'm so tired of rain here in Baltimore.
I was gonna say you've been getting a lot of rain and like severe weather, right?
Yes, we've had a lot of rain.
We have been back and forth in Chicago, which is normal Chicago, right? Springtime and so forth. But I'm over it. I think I'm ready for spring to have sprung here.
Right.
But Jill, I'm thrilled you're letting me know. And I don't know what part of California you're in, but I'm headed out to California tomorrow. So I will absolutely pack up the rain gear too, just in case, because got to be prepared, right?
Yeah, it's just supposed to be today, but I love like just the three of us. We have the country, like the US at least covered. We're West, East, and Midwest. So
that is true. That is true. All the weathers, but we are waiting for summertime. I can't wait for the summer weather. I know I'm like, please, even though I shouldn't complain. It's really nice today. It's in the 60s, but I'm like, I just want it to be like in the 70s. You know, I want it to be warm. I want to walk outside with short sleeves, like I want to put on a dress. I'm just saying now you all know like I don't want to be dressed like this.
I would say fly to Chicago because it will be in the 70s, but by the time you get here, it will probably be back to the 50s. So
true.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, hey, if this is your first time joining Real Talk, as you can see, we like to just have honest conversations, not only about what's happening in our life, but really how to lead people forward in food. So I'm Jill, this is Tia, and our guest today, Beth, is here, and she has had years of experience in food safety, quality, consulting, and someone who spent years leading global food safety programs as a VP. And now, Beth, right, you work as a consultant with organizations. And I love this because you get to walk in and see things with fresh eyes that maybe people haven't seen in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And even as we were kind of getting ready today, we talked about, right, all these perspectives, especially an outside perspective, can be so valuable. Mm-hmm. And that's really what today's conversation is about. Because when we are in an organization, we are part of the leadership that has built the culture that we are in. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it's even hard to see the things that have contributed to what's in front of us. And that becomes normal. We kind of explain things away like, oh, that's just how we do it. But those are things that are also really powerful to be able to connect to culture. And so that's what we're talking about. And if you're leading in a food company or you're responsible for what happens when something goes wrong, this show today is for you because we're diving into all of that.
Yes, yes. And it's super relevant as we think about our cultures. We think about how to shift. I know food safety culture has been a topic, right, for decades.
Decades.
And
Absolutely.
I don't even like the word. I don't even like the phrase anymore.
right, because it's I mean,
Maybe
how many times have we had conversations around, is it a buzzword? Are we shifting? Is this happening? And many times, and we see it with our clients, when we come in and we talk about culture, I mean, not just food safety culture, but culture and people, even the leaders are think back to, oh yeah, we used to do that. Or, oh yeah, I did that in another role. But it's like an outside perspective can help us connect to things that we maybe remember, or new ideas on, ooh, we haven't tried it that way before.
Yeah. I love how you phrase that, Jill, like there's a desensitizing to that statement, right? And I think it is, let's get beyond that statement.
Yeah.
Let's get to what is really personal, right? And thinking about our commitment and so forth, right? I always think back to the first time I bought a car, right? From the car salesman. And the car salesman is just like, what's going to make you commit to this today? Right? And like sign on this line, right? And I'm like, like I've never dealt with that before. But like, you as a person, right? When you commit to something and you sign for something, you're like 99% because your brain is channeled to it. You've made this commitment, right? You're all in, right? And so forth. And I'm not advocating that food safety people become used car salesmen. Let's be clear, right? But I do think it's about, let's get beyond the statement. Let's get beyond the requirement in a GFSI audit. Let's get to the hearts and minds of this, not just the org structure and the tactical moves, right, that we make to achieve this. Let's really get to the heart of it. And it was, you talked about I've shifted, right, and so forth. And a facility that I went into the other day producing baby food, right? And right up as you go inside this facility is a picture of a baby. And every single person in the facility had signed on it, but also said their personal why it's so important. Not just that baby face, right, that I walk by, the elephant in the room every time I go into the facility, but their personal reason. And any new person, they pull it down. What is your personal reason to assure this product at the end of the day, right? And I think that's a piece, right? We're so focused on, can I check the box? And we're not getting to the hearts and minds, which is really what assures the product at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
And I loved your conversation last week. I was nerding out on it, and I say nerd lovingly, because of those portions, right? Is get beyond the paper and the pencil, get to the hearts and the minds, right?
Gosh, that reminds me of back in the day when I worked at Golden Plump. One of the things that we did that was most successful was to have everybody kind of do that same thing, where it was food safety, I promise. And it sounds so funny, but the I promise is so personal.
Yeah.
Right? There is no passing that off. And that was so powerful. And I've carried that with me. And it reminds me of something that Tia and I talk a lot about with people, is that people protect what they own. But so often I think with food safety, we want people to do things, but we don't want to give up that full ownership of something. Like we feel and I'm going to generalize as a food safety kind of technical expert, right? That I'm like, oh, you can do all of that, but not quite this part. Or you don't know enough maybe about that part to make that happen or to decide that. So I've contributed to not allowing people to be full owners. And so I think that's part of what I've seen, that they're like, I kind of do my part and I'll do it well. But when I think about asking them for commitment, I never allowed for them to fully step into commitment because I was never turning over ownership.
Ooh, yeah.
Ooh.
Not fully.
That's like a mic drop right there, right? Is empowering people, right? is when I go into these facilities, right, is a key tell of kind of the maturity of food safety and quality is the question, who owns it?
Yeah.
Right? And if everybody's pointing at the food safety person, it's like, you have 300 people in your facility, right? It's
Right.
the same thing as safety, right? As we
Mhm.
all own it, but you're right. You have to give those reins, right?
Yeah.
And I think especially in food safety, we think about the operations not giving reins to people to be able to stop the line and do what needs to get done.
Mhm.
But we need to do the same. And I think there's an important inflection point here, Jill, right? As I go into these facilities, oftentimes, and I was so worried about this title. I'm like, oh Lord, what do I need to share here for people? What do I see? But I think what I see most often is a disconnect between people not seeing and people not understanding.
Mm.
Because they might see it, right? Physically, okay, yes, I can see it. But what do I do to really rectify it? Right? And how do I appreciate what that means to the bigger picture? I might not at all, right? And so are we empowering them, but empowering them with the right knowledge to be really effective in that as well, right? So it's both a see and understand, and I'm going to expand the see to like all of your senses,
Right.
because more often than not, I smell it before I see it, or I hear it. Like, what is that crunching sound? Like, why do I hear like this friction sound going on?
Yeah.
So I'm going to expand it, bring all of those senses to the equation, right? Not just what you see, but the entire picture, right?
Yes.
To what's transpiring.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, Tia, go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, I love exactly what you're talking about, where when you walk in, it's not just what you see, but you're really using all of these senses. And I love too the way that you talked about this understanding. When we talk about empowerment, we talk about how it really is a shift of power from yourself to others. And that must be done in a responsible way, right? You can't just say, oh, everything is yours now go, right? Like, we've been in those situations. We've had clients where they're like, well, operations is supposed to be doing this, but I have no idea if they're doing it, if they're doing it right, if they've been trained. Like, I don't have any of these parts, but they're supposed to be doing it. I don't know if they are or not, right? Not responsible. Versus, how do I give them what they need in order to produce safe, quality food? Like, that is the mindset around it. And I love the way that you break it down from like not just being able to see it, but understand, how does this moment in time impact the product? How does it impact what I'm sending out or what someone is going to experience with the product? How does that fit in? How does that fit into my day-to-day job? But then also, how does that fit into my quality team and what they do, or what HR does, or, insert other functions? Do they really understand that they're this critical part in a 300 person job, or in a 10 function organization? Do they really understand that they are this critical piece of it? And sometimes we miss that. People just kind of just see what's in front of them and that's it.
I love that. Yeah. And I was thinking, just as an offshoot to that, right? And that understanding is the language that we use to communicate, right? In our little world, right? We have a very technical language. And I was at an offsite last week, and I'm sitting in the back of this vehicle, and everyone else in the vehicle are finance people. And I was like, wow, there I was thinking I knew a little bit about finance, but this is a foreign language today, and I'm learning so many new things, right? So I think there's an element of how do we translate in a way that's meaningful to the people that we're connecting with, right? I think oftentimes when we make assumptions as to where people are connecting with it, but we're not sure they're really connecting with it in a way that's super meaningful. I also think people are a little afraid to say when they don't know.
Wow.
And I think there's such an important reframe that we need to make here, which is, I don't understand it yet, right?
Yeah, I love yet.
I love yet. I love
Mhm.
that is my absolute favorite 3-letter word these days is the power of yet, right? Is, my 6-year-old daughter is a sponge and she's learning so much and she gets frustrated because she's like, I don't get it. I can't do it. And it's like, you can't do it yet. You got to keep going and asking the right questions. But I think we've got to be open to that too, right? To save space for an actual appreciation and understanding, and not, okay, let me cruise to the end of this, right? And check the block, right?
Yeah. It reminds me of what you said earlier with the used car salesman, when you're saying, okay, he's saying, what do you need to commit? And we've all bought cars, right? And they mean it. Like, tell me, what do you need to commit? And I'm going to see if I can do it so I can get you this car. If we look at it from our perspective of what can we do for you to commit to food safety? Even just are we afraid of what the answer is going to be? Are we really going to be able to support what they say, I need this in order to commit, right? I need different equipment, or I need insert, right? Are we afraid of those answers? So we don't really ask because we feel like they should commit in the environment that we're kind of putting them in. When in reality, right, we've already kind of talked about this. We have a culture problem in the food industry, and we're telling them to commit fully without saying, what is it that you need to commit to what we're doing? How can I make that? I mean, it really is servant leadership, right? How do I remove barriers for you in order for you to fully commit to what we're doing? What do you need to be able to understand, to be able to see, to be able to feel, to be able to take on what it is we're moving towards in the future? And I don't think I've ever heard someone ask the question, what is it going to take for you to commit to food safety in that way, and be willing to listen and do? It's actually really interesting to kind of think about.
Well, I think that ties into something, Beth, that you talked about earlier, that words matter. And when we think about culture and just how we are, or how people are when in an organization, it seems, whether it's an audit or our own internal assessment, that we often go to something that is physical, that we can see, which is the line and the process and what people are doing. And I know the conversation is often around how do we look at behaviors and some of the why and the understanding. But I wonder about how powerful it would be if, as leaders, we could create space to actually pause and think about those words and notice the relationships we have, and the relationships or the conversations we shy away from, or the decisions we hold back from, or those are the moments that are telling us about what culture is in those spaces.
Yeah.
And yet that's not a spot where we typically pause long enough to be able to notice or follow perhaps this moment, this gut instinct, or this all of a sudden this intuitive moment where you're like, oh, what was that? We kind of just keep barreling through it. Or maybe it's like me, maybe I was uncertain of what do I do with that? Are those the invisible things, or have you noticed those when you walk into companies? Or I'm just curious what.
I mean, absolutely. I'm going to take this maybe in two parts, right? And the first part of this, I don't think anyone will be shocked by, right? Is when I walk into a facility, if people are making eye contact with me, if they're, they just come up and talk with you, right? Like, oh, I want to show you this, and let's go look at that. And, I'm so excited you're here. That says a lot about the culture, right there, right? Or it's they make no eye contact. And look, usually when I go into these facilities, right, I've got visitor right across here. I'm in like a red smock, so everybody knows I'm a visitor. You know, the whole 9 yards, right? And then you get people who make no eye contact, who you can see on their face, like, please don't ask me a question about food safety. Like, I just want to finish my shift and I want to leave. Right.
Yeah.
And I think there's a piece that we're forgetting in this process, which is just everyone wants to be acknowledged, right? Whether they're at the table with you or they're not, right? And I think one of the things that I've learned the most from is just those healthy pauses and making sure that I really am listening to the conversation, whether that is the plant manager, the finance person, the mechanic who's out on the line, the sanitation team members, you know, whoever it is really pausing on that, but also bringing that voice back to the conversation.
Yes.
Because, you know, it's not uncommon. I'll go in and people will say, well, we've brought this up before, and they really don't do anything about it. And I'm like, well, happy to bring that up again, and maybe we connect it to other things. So I'll give you an example. I went into this one facility, you know, and they said, well, our biggest problem is we're having all of these different complaints, right? Complaints associated with the product quality overall, so on and so forth. And so this is one of the facilities I can smell it before I can see it, right? I can smell the odor from the decay and the mold and the this, that, and other thing, right? And so forth. And when I went in, you know, I said, okay, well, you know, I'm smelling this odor. So I really want to take a look at the equipment. And, you know, people in the room were like, what odor?
Wow.
And I was like, really? Okay. So we have normalized this odor in our facility. It's been there so long, right? That people are just like, that's just the natural order of operations, right? It's like,
wow.
And then I spent time with the mechanics and I spent time on sanitation, and we talked, you know, it was like, yeah, we're not getting down to the baseline, a level of clean every day, and we're being pushed to just finish. So we had to bring that team out and say, I can show you where these smells are coming from, lifting up different belts, opening up different vessels, and just like, I want you to smell into here, right, to re-get your sense of smell back. And then I want you to put your nose right in that vessel and tell me what you smell, right?
Wow.
Right. So you gotta bring them along on that journey a little bit, to open up the eyes, to open up the nose, but also be that voice of some of these folks who aren't necessarily feeling like you're hearing them and you're starting to action those things. Sorry, I talked a head off there. Go ahead, Jill.
No. But I think that's so important, because I think so often we do have team members that they feel their voice isn't being heard. And so when you bring leaders to a spot like you talked about, I'm curious, like, what does that moment look like for those leaders? Do they recognize, are they like, oh, good, now we get it? Or do they push back? Like, what happens in those moments to either confirm, wow, we hear you, or perhaps the opposite?
It's a mix of both. It's a mix of both. For some, it really is like, I never even thought to pull up that, you know, to pull up that conveyor. I never thought to look inside of there. Like, it's not even on our pre-op inspection to look in there, right? And so forth. So some of it is that realization of, we need to go beyond what's there today and really be more curious. We've got to look in other places. So it's Oh, an aha moment. Those are the ones I love and everybody loves. Like, okay, great. And, connecting it back to, well, these are the people who've been saying this. So how do we start to make sure that that loop is continuous, right? But I think others, I think one of my favorite ones is but here's the reason why we can't, right? But it's an old facility. That's probably my favorite one. I just flew back from Charlotte, North Carolina, and what I'm certain is at least a 40-year-old plane.
Right. Yes.
All right. And nobody's saying, but it's a 40-year-old plane. I can't take care of this plane.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same concept. I'm a consumer in an airline. You have consumers for your product. You need to make sure that your space is fit for purpose, right? And fit for purpose doesn't mean everything is 316 stainless, plated gold. And it's really, how we zone our facilities, right? And well, this isn't fit because we have so much collection on the line. We have so many of this going on. So we need to evolve this. But at the same time, you spent too much over here, right? Where it's not needed. So I think as you get into kind of that pushback space, is thinking about what are some of those normal business levers and how do you start to overcome some of them, right? And that's a piece outside of that culture. When I think about food safety and quality folks, that's usually a gap for them. Being able to bridge between what's important in food safety and quality and connecting that back to, well, here's what you said our goals are. Here's how this connects to that. Here's our biggest issue. You've said this is our biggest issue. Here's how that connects to this and why we need to do Y.
Yes, 100% agree with that. And many times we wait for someone else to tell us, when in reality, it's really our leadership that is responsible for connecting that for the organization. We want to do this as a food safety and quality group, or insert any function. And this is how this ties back to our overall goals of the organization. And you're right. It's funny, like even when you were talking about like, oh, this is an old facility, so we can't do these things. I just think like we've all kind of watched HGTV and we've all kind of watched places that are super old all of a sudden feel like it's brand new. And I love it too, the way you talk about like you put money here, you don't want to put money here because that's like wasting money, whatever it happens to be. And I feel like when we think about newer generations coming into the workforce, they're not going to accept this is an old building and therefore we can't do these things because, well, we know that we can do these things in old buildings, right? You just need to put the funds towards it. Or they're kind of asking the question, well, then why are we using it? Too old to use. Why are we using it? If it can't get us to the level of clean that we need to see, right, to the type of culture we want to see. I'm curious, like when we talk about this gap and normalizing, right, where it's like just like the smell, where the smell is now a part of day to day versus like saying, ooh, something's off here. What do you see sort of happening in a food organization to get to that point? Or what kind of accelerates them to get to the point of going nose blind or not really seeing the things that an outside person coming in will say, ooh, why is the wall green? And everyone's like, it's always been green. How do they get there?
Yeah. I think some of it goes back to what we were talking about, right? Is bringing the right people to the table, right? So I'm thinking back to when I was an FSQ manager and I had this amazing supervisor, but I would never bring her into an audit, right? Because she would be like, yep, and we've had all these issues and yep, and they're still going on. It's like, okay, with the customer, like, yes, She loves what she does, but you don't bring that here, right? But there are people you're not bringing to the table who actually can get those things moving. I think some of it, sometimes it's well, we've heard this before, we haven't been able to solve it. And because we can't solve it, we're going to just kind of put it in this bucket over here of like, we'll figure it out later at some point, right? And part of that is, are we bringing, so a lot of my time gets spent on the floor. I spend a lot of time in sanitation. I spend a lot of time with maintenance. And all I do is, I am not a maintenance person in any way, shape, or form, right? My husband would tell you, I can't fix something simple. I hand it to him, right? That's not my area of expertise. But what I do is just be really curious and keep asking questions. And oftentimes it's the people that you're not bringing to the table that have the solve for you, right? Because they look at it in a different way, or they're on that piece of equipment all day long, right? And they have the solve. You're not bringing them into that solve, right? So it goes back to what we were talking about of empowering some people who aren't at the table to really help you to fix the things that, you haven't been able to solve. I think back to there's this old thing where, they had kindergartners in one room and they were building like the tallest tower with marshmallows. And then they had a whole bunch of MBAs off in another room trying to build the tallest tower. So who built the tallest tower?
Yeah.
The kindergartners.
Right.
It's always who you don't expect, the marshmallow test.
Right.
Right. It's the kindergartners, because there's no ego there.
Right.
There is just, how do we solve it? Right. And so I think there's an element of, let's get past the titles at the table. Let's get to the solve, right? I think that's a piece of it is, yep, we've brought it up before. We couldn't solve it. So we're moving on. Right. And or
that's real.
Yeah, that's real.
That is so real. And I love talking about that because the book, The Culture Code, actually uses that as one of their first examples. And it was the first time when I read that years ago when they used the term status management to explain that difference between why the kindergartners were so good at this, because they weren't worried about, oh, that person I'm working with has this title. I don't know if I can tell them, that sucks. Or whatever that was, the group of MBAs, they were so caught up, and probably not even conscious of it. This status management that was happening that slowed them down and created less effective methods.
Right.
So I love that you bring that up, because I think in culture, there is that element of this status management and this hierarchy that naturally builds within leadership and org structures. And it takes so much intentional effort to, I'm going to almost say, like, break that.
Yeah.
And I think for
me,
we
miss that. Sorry. And we miss that as leaders, right? Because we've created this culture of kind of this hierarchy. And so we miss that it exists, to be intentional about making sure that we actively try to dissolve it as well.
Right.
Yeah. And I think there's an element of ego, right? And a bit of pride, right? I heard somebody say, when you're driving, ego and pride are like right next to each other, right? And at the end of the day, we all just want to be acknowledged, right? I talked about, I'm not a maintenance person, but maintenance is going to bring a perspective that I will never have. Just like the production manager is going to bring a perspective that I will never have unless I sit in those shoes, right? And I create that for myself, or I pause to hear that, right? And to hear how that, a statement I love, how is that sitting with you? What I just said, how is that sitting with you? And just, you've got to pause Because that's when we can bring each other along on that journey and we're all on the same page, man, things go fast.
Yeah, and I feel like people don't ask other people outside of the people that are sitting at the table that question. Oh, we just finished that training. What do you think about it? How do you think that went? How's that going to impact your role? Or many times going to someone saying, I'm having this problem. What do you think it could be? I love the way you said, let's get past the titles and let's get to the solution. And many times the people who have the solutions are the ones who's working with it every single day. And really, you're going to ask that question of, how is this sitting with you? What problems do you have here? Oh, our other plant is having this problem. Do we see that here? Just asking those questions around it where someone else, right, probably has the solution over us. And really, the higher you are up in the organization, the farther you are away from the solution.
Yeah.
You should be asking more of those questions of people around you because you are farther away from the solution by design, right? Like, we need you to be thinking about strategy. We need you to be thinking about what's going to happen in 10 years. We need you to think about, I was just having a conversation with someone about their organization. It's like, well, what's the 10-year plan? Like, what are they trying to be? Someone needs to be thinking about that.
Yep.
But there's people there that's solving current issues. And if you're trying to solve a current issue, like your culture issue, right, or food safety issue, you have to talk to the people that's working there. That's a part of it.
And I would even go one further to say, not just thinking about where else are we having this problem? That's important. But I think this alludes to something you talked a little bit about earlier, and that Tia, you and I talk about this in boot camp a lot, in terms of, why is the loop broken that somebody isn't heard?
Yeah.
That's what the leader should solve. Because when people do see things that aren't working, our natural instinct is to say, hey, over here, something's not working. And over time, we've kind of tampered that down by saying, oh, that's not your job, or don't worry about that, or that's not right, whatever those things are. And it doesn't happen just at work, in other places in life too, that carries over. But as leaders, if we can ask those questions, like, what created the environment that made it so that person's voice couldn't be heard? That will help us make strides.
Yes.
I agree with you. I mean, it goes back to entering a facility, right? It's the people who are going to just, I'm going to put my head down. I'm just going to do my job. That's it, right? It's that same mentality, right? And it is about, how do we start to change that? And how do we start to lower the barrier of entry to the conversation? And one of the things I adopted a long time ago, because this is true, and sometimes I get people who laugh at it, but I always say, this group, there are far smarter people in this group than me, which is absolutely true, because everyone comes with a different skill set, different perspective. They know something more than I don't. And if we don't hear that piece, we're not really going to solve it. Right. Yeah. And, I was thinking back to a facility I walked into, and there's just piles of product on the floor. And I'm like, the yield loss, it's a tripping hazard. People are going to, I'm stepping around it because I'm like, I am the klutziest person in the world. I landed on my butt on my first date with my husband. I am steering clear of all of that kind of thing. But I'm just help me understand why this is here, and somebody was like, oh, we've tried to solve that so many different times, right? We've never been able to solve it. And I'm watching the line, and I'm like, let's pause here for a few minutes, Here's what I'm seeing as I'm watching this. What do you see? Oh, I see this, and I see that, and I see this. I'm like, wow, and then I go to the food and what about you? What are you seeing on this line? And is any of that new? And how do we operationalize that so you don't have this, Mount Everest standing in the middle, coming off?
Yes.
coming off of this line, right? So being more curious and pausing to solve some of those people, some of those opportunities is time well spent.
Yes. Time well spent. And you have to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
You have to, and I like the story that you just told, because you intentionally said, well, let's pause. Let's take a look. Let's ask some questions, right? Versus saying, oh, yeah, we see it. We need to solve it. Keep going, right? Like, no, let's intentionally pause and look and see what's happening to see if, right, we have a solution for it or what solution to put into place. And it makes me think about, right, it sounds so simple. And I talk about this all the time. We talk about it all the time, just from a leadership skills standpoint, where it sounds easy to be able to intentionally pause, or to ask questions in a certain way, or even to stay curious while our to-do list is like, right, going up, up, up. And in reality, it takes skill to be able to do that. And many times leaders are doing the opposite, right? They're shutting people down, or they are making people feel like that they're not valued, or they're not acknowledging people, or even Jill, like what you're saying around, like, we had this incident, but did anyone circle back and say, wow, why did we not hear them when they told us over the last 2 years or over the last 6 months? I feel like we struggle at that as leaders, to do that loop back, to really focus on what skills do we need to build in our leaders to shift our culture. And I'm curious, as you walk into facilities, what do you see leaders do that they might unintentionally do to shift their culture in a negative way, or to continue to keep their culture where it is because of how they show up, whether consciously or unconsciously?
Yeah, I mean, not surprisingly, a lot of people in those leadership roles are there because they've been able to get things done, right? And I'm sure you all have taken like DISC and some of those other personality things, right? And so forth, and are drivers, right? They're people who want to be able to accomplish and do the little tick mark, and I finished this. I'm even, on that DISC model, I'm a red blue, right? So, but for me, I absolutely have to be conscious of that.
Yeah.
And one thing I pose to these leaders when they're like, we need to do this and we need to do this and we need to do this, is two elements. One, what is the worst thing that could happen if you slowed down a little bit to bring people along so that they actually want to do it, and they see value in it because their voice has been heard. And usually it's just, well, I told them I'd finish it by X. Oh, so this is your personal to-do date when this is going to be done. So can that adjust slightly in order to get better buy-in from the front, because people are actually a part of the conversation versus you bulldozing over them to get to the end. And the fix might not fix it, right? What is the worst that can happen? The other piece is, and I think drivers in general tend to be scared of this, is you can do anything, but you cannot do everything. And so you have to be intentional in where you spend your time, right? And then usually I will circle that back to the reason you brought me in was this, right? And kind of having that eye-opening moment of like, you probably wouldn't have even had to pay me, right? If you just paused and brought the right people into the conversation and paused to make sure that their voices are actually in that conversation. Say less, ask more.
Yes. I like how you say, like, you probably didn't even need to bring me in if you just pause. right? If you just pause and be intentional about how you're bringing people along with you. And then the personal like deadline, like that's a real thing, right? I feel like that's a real thing, especially for high performers.
Oh, yes.
You have your deadline, you're going for that, when in reality, you've talked to no one about this deadline, number one. Like, this is your own personal one. You've talked to no one. You haven't aligned with anyone. And you haven't aligned with people who are not typically at your table because they're not on your timeline, right? And they have the ability to derail your timeline. But you haven't had any conversations, but you have this deadline that you wrote on a sticky note or in your notebook or on your calendar that you're marching towards, regardless of what the culture is telling you to do, right? Which is the slow down, be more intentional, bring more people with you. It's kind of interesting how we kind of get into that mindset, and we bulldoze through.
Well, it's almost like we forget that leadership in itself is a system. It's a process. And I think about companies that I admire that it feels like maybe not organizationally, but maybe pockets that seem to foster strong culture. They really make sure that this intentional leadership is at the core versus companies where it does seem to break down because it is just driven by go do, go do, go do, go do.
Right. Yeah.
And, I think about, later this week, I have, some one-on-one with some clients, not just coaching, but like checking in. And even for me, right, my natural instinct is to be like, tell me what's happening with this project and this project and this project. And I have to intentionally pause to create space to ask the bigger questions, like, like what's been going well? Like, what have you been proud of? Like, where do you feel you're stuck? Where do you feel you could make decisions that you're not able to right now? And that is, even for me, someone in this space that advocates for others, I still have to remind myself to pause and step into that space instead of the default that is, tell me about those projects. Tell me where we are.
Because I think there's an element where we all want to provide value, right? Back to the company that we're working for, as a consultant, the big piece for me is I need to be able to show value as quickly as possible, right? Yeah. That what you spent on me made sense at the end of the day, right? And that you have, for me, I'd say, I want to give you tools that'll make you successful so you don't have to come back to me, right? Those are tools for life, right? There's value in not just having a full plate.
Yes.
There's value in being able to have the time to think about things and to actually put in things that will be meaningful beyond Beth Fernandes in this moment. And I think sometimes we bypass that value. And Jill, you were talking about the best companies that you have seen, right? Who really bring this to life. I think a part of it, and companies struggle with this, I think because they have a lot of drivers, is the ruthless prioritization. What is really important? What do we have to go after, for our business, for our customer? Let's get really clear on defining that. And then all this other stuff is other stuff, which if we have time, that's great. But if we don't, we need to be able to say, and everybody be okay with it, is, but these are our priorities. This is what we're focused on and why.
I think organizations, I agree with you. I think organizations too that have strong leaders, they understand that how they accomplish those goals is important, is equally important as accomplishing them, if not more. So if we have to cut corners or treat people poorly or not bring people along with us, then maybe we shouldn't do that right now. Right? Maybe we need to think about it in the sense of like, we need to make sure we're not destroying our culture while trying to accomplish priorities. We need to make sure that people feel appreciated. We need to make sure people feel acknowledged, that they are a part of it, that they are actually championing the things that we're doing, right? That we've asked the question, what do you need in order to commit to this future? So we're all marching together towards these priorities. Because we've seen it where organizations, like, they might be hitting all the goals, they're making all the money, they're doing all this, but people are miserable. And the way that leaders talk to their teammates are terrible. And people feel horrible showing up to this organization. But check, everything's green, right? Everything's green, everything's going. But they're missing this key part of, are we taking care of our people? How we get these things done is important. And that's what shows up in culture.
So Beth, I'm curious, there's a lot of talk right now since, it's not just SQF that's come out with edition 10 saying we're going to audit differently. Like, all the GFSI schemes are stepping into a space, even regulators, where they want to be able to more objectively understand culture. And I'm curious if, from the work that you've done, do you think companies are prepared for that level of scrutiny? And I think that level of scrutiny is still something we're navigating. What does that actually mean? But I'm going to stack a question here. What do you think auditors will find that organizations aren't expecting?
I'm going to take the easy part of that question. The first part.
Start with the easy.
I think there are some companies who are ready for that. Is that food safety and quality is an everyday pulse in that company. And they have brought it to every level. They have connected at every level across the organization. I think, Jill, you and I were talking before about, I view that the same way I view values, right? Many companies, I've been given the company values and I have it on this little card, but if somebody asks me what are the company values offhand and I don't have the card, I don't know, right? Because we never talk about it unless it's, HR asking me what are the 5, because we haven't brought it to the hearts and minds. We haven't personalized it. We haven't learned about it enough. I don't understand it. I don't see it even alive and well in my company, but you're going to ask me a random question that I should be able to answer, right?
Yes.
So we've got to get it to, so I don't think every company is there today. I've seen it, right? I've seen both sides of that fence. There are some who are, and those who are have really operationalized it throughout everything they do. It's important. It's key. We talk about it all the time, right? It shows up in our goals. It shows up in our mission. It's connected back to what we do at the end of the day. The ones who are not ready are thinking, it's an audit. I'll just tell 5 people, be ready, and I'm going to come over to you and you talk about food safety that day. Right? But food safety happens every single day. And in order to assure that, you have to be prepared for that piece. From an auditor standpoint, whether it's, so recently they talked about how FDA and Department of Health and all of those are really starting to get together and be more consistent in their audits out to the different facilities. And I think it's similar, is we're just thinking they're going to ask the normal types of stuff and they're going to look at the normal things. But what I share with people is, just like I'm coming in and using all of my senses, right? And I'm getting really curious about everything that's happening. I'm staying on third shift and I'm talking to these people. Now, I don't think the FDA will stay on third shift unless it's for cause, but
or the only shift that sanitation's on.
But I think if you think in that mindset about food safety and quality is an everyday thing, it doesn't just happen one day out of 365. And you have it connected well back to the company's, this is our commitment to food safety. And then you have it connected at each level. This is my commitment to food safety, and this is why, and that you're talking about it all the time. People feel it. that's going to translate. It's going to translate across auditors. It's going to translate day to day. It's going to be there, but that's not where people are today. They're thinking about let me show you this checklist and let me show you this audit we do and let me do this versus really getting to the hearts and minds of people.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the way you talk about that, because I agree, because we should be able to, each person in your organization should be able to talk about how do these values show up in the work that they do and what does it mean to them. I love using the example of integrity. Integrity probably is one of the most common values, I would say, in organizations, but integrity can mean a lot of different things to different people. So what does it mean here in the organization, and how do you relate it to the work that people do and how individual people feel about integrity? Because the organizations could say, well, we have integrity because we share all the information that's happening with our people, as long as it's not confidential. And then the other person's like, well, we don't have integrity because I see what's happening right here in my plant. And then that's what they're basing all their integrity on, versus the organization saying, well, we have integrity because we do these town halls. We have transparency. So it's like integrity means something different to people. How have you communicated that this is what it means here? I remember, Jill, when we were at a conference in Mexico City, and a part of our presentation was relating values to how it shows up, right? We talk about it a lot in our strategic leader. And we asked the audience questions on like, how does this show up as you're having conversation about food safety? Right? Like when you're in conflict with someone, how do you lean on the values that you're supposed to embody there at the organization? And you can hear some people are like, well, we really don't do that. Or some people had some good examples. Some people are just like, well, we have 5 values and I know them all, but really can't relate it to the work that they do every day. And I think that that's a huge miss. That's a huge miss for organizations. And for the people.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Gosh, our time always goes so fast. Beth, we could talk at least, for sure another hour.
Hands down.
I bet like we could like do more, way more, but I want to be mindful of time and even, your time in the audience. But I am curious before we wrap up, what's one thing you want a food company leader to actually do after this conversation? Not just think about like, oh, that was a good point that Beth made or that Tia made, but actually go do.
I think I'll boil it down to 2 words, which is taking the time to care, right? Not to just tick the box and get something done, right? If you care and you're curious, you're going to ask a lot more. You're going to put this ego off to the side and you're going to engage in a different way. And I think that would be my ask, right? Is none of us knows everything until the robot apocalypse and, AI takes over everything, we're people at the end of the day, and we all bring things to the equation. Take time to understand what that is, because then your solutions and the things you're trying to solve are going to be much richer for it.
Much richer for it.
Yeah. And that makes things like passing audits, hitting numbers, and showing up every day much easier when people know that you care about them and what they do.
Yeah, I feel like what strikes me the most from this conversation is that you're not just describing like rare or dramatic situations, right? You're describing organizations from what you see, right? When you walk into it, and it's not about just passing audits or hitting the numbers. It's really, how are we showing up every day, right? What is that gap that's really costing consumers, right? People that work there, our organizations. And we always talk about like culture problems are expensive, You know, and they're expensive, and they're typically things that we are not intentionally focused on, or people have stopped noticing, which we kind of talked about today, right? As a part of our conversation, and it kind of hangs out in the background when you talk about the client that you went into, and there's piles of product on the floor. That is money sitting on the floor, and we always have people come up to us on like, well, if they just put money here, we can save all of this. But the organization, right, just hasn't listened to those people. And the one thing that stood out to me is how do you make sure that you are listening to those people? How do you bring those people into the conversation?
Yeah.
Be intentional.
Be
Absolutely.
All right. Well, if you're listening and today's conversation made you want to pause and be intentional to understand where your organization stands, we've put together a guide that specifically is made for this type of moment. And even though the focus is kind of in this vein of SQF, because they're kind of out in the in our space right now, talking a lot about their changes, it's really a guide for any company, whether you're GFSI certified or not. But it's intended to just give you actually there's 6 questions. I'll tell you, there's 6 questions. That's a self-assessment just to help you just pause and think about some of the things that we talked about today. So we're going to link it in the show notes so that you can grab that. But this is the time that when you're ready to have a real conversation about what's hiding inside your organization's culture gap, like now's the time to go do. So if that's getting our guide, if it's talking with us, because we love to brainstorm, like we're happy to do that. And it's no pitch, it's just honest conversation. And the goal is to get you moving forward. Because one thing we believe in is that culture doesn't change until leaders do. So it starts with you.
Absolutely.
So true.
Thank you, Beth, for being here with us
Thank
today.
you so
Love
much
the
for having
conversation.
me.
Yes. Love.
Anytime.
Yes. Thank you to our audience for being out here, adding your perspectives, listening, right? And of course, doing the work that you do every day.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us. That's today's Real Talk. We'll see you next time.
Yes. See you next Monday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.